Hello everybody, as you know, I'm Adam Gamble and I'm one of your classmates in Indigenous Studies 201. For my term project, I've decided to research reservation housing. The fact is, reservation housing is an issue all across Canada. Right now, I'm at the Standing Buffalo Reservation, about 45 minutes east of Regina. Follow me as I show you why. Driving through the Standing Buffalo Reservation, the conditions of housing might seem perfectly fine, but they're not. Before I get ahead of myself and show you how this is so, it's important to understand how the conditions of reservation housing came to be. Thus, I'm going to take you back in history and show you how colonialism has played its role in the conditions of reservation housing today. In the mid-19th century, it became evident that the coexistence between Aboriginal peoples and Europeans was no longer an option. Europeans wanted ultimate authority and power, which meant changing the way the two nations lived. To change this meant creating a place, far from a white society, where Aboriginal peoples would live, namely, reservations. You may be thinking, how does the establishment of reservations relate to the poor conditions of reservation housing today? Well, the answer to this question can be found by looking at the Manitoulin Islands Reservation along Lake Huron in 1836. There, it was explained to the Aboriginal peoples of Lake Huron that on such land proper housing shall be built for you, and proper assistance given to enable you to become civilized and to cultivate land. Soon after placing these Aboriginal peoples on the Manitoulin Islands Reservation, their lives worsened. In 1862, the Crown forced the surrender of the islands for their own benefit, giving the tribe from Lake Huron no choice but to move elsewhere. These actions of the Crown created a void in the relationship between the Canadian government and Aboriginal peoples, which has grown over history. The government's words were often subject to unilateral change, which made it difficult for Aboriginal peoples to trust them. The void between the Canadian government and Aboriginal peoples can be seen in the promises made by treaties. For example, Treaty No. 8 in British Columbia promised the full beneficial interest of the Indians in the lands. However, the use of water was controlled by the government. In 1929, the Scott-Cathcart Agreement, which aimed at fulfilling the promises made by Treaty 8, stated that the Aboriginal peoples of Treaty 8 would be granted rights to take construction materials in case a home were in need of repair. Unfortunately, the conditions of reservation life, including housing, did not change as a result of the Scott-Cathcart Agreement. As time progressed, Aboriginal peoples continued to depend on the government. One example of the effect depending on the Canadian government had on Aboriginal peoples is the corruption of chiefs and band councils as a result of their traditional ways of governance being replaced with liberal ways of rule. Taking away Aboriginal peoples' political and economic autonomy did not teach chiefs and band councils how to help their people live in a suitable fashion. Rather, they became first-hand witnesses to the suffering of their people. When Aboriginal self-governance was granted on reservations, chiefs and band councils began abusing their power. Naturally, how could chief and band councils not act unlawfully after a history of being treated poorly, during which hatred and resentment towards the government persisted? Inevitably, the corruption of Aboriginal self-governance is one of the factors that has led to poor reservation housing conditions. With this understanding, I feel that you're well informed on the history of colonialism and reservation housing, and are ready to experience what Aboriginal peoples are currently living in. How would you describe the conditions of reservation housing today?
I would say housing on reserve is the worst that I've seen in my entire life right now. The housing, very poor. There's no basements in these other houses, and I'm not sure why they quit making basements. They're just these bungalows here, and a lot this ground in this area here, all along in this, is very sandy. So when the houses, the ground freezes, expands, thaws, and it sinks down.
Drops. Yeah.
So do the houses, because they're not. There's no basement. There's not enough support under there for them. So our houses are falling apart.
Speaking of houses that are falling apart, I was able to visit the home of Tiffany Redmond. who had moved into a new home a couple years ago and is already experiencing problems. Tiffany, the house, was it built on time here? Like, did they have everything lined up? You moved in when you were supposed to move in, or was it all backed up?
No, when they started building, okay, when I found out I got a house was at the beginning of the year, I think, of 2010. I said, when are they going to start building it? Oh, we'll start building when it's spring, when the ground thaws. Okay. I don't know what happened, but they didn't start until August. I remember they started during the powwow. And I didn't move in until the next year at the powwow. Not even a week before the powwow I moved in. So it took a whole year before I was cleared to move in.
Since then, she has had to deal with mold in her daughter's bedroom, her son's bedroom, as well as in the basement. Furthermore, there are wires dangling from the wall, cupboards that are falling apart, as well as 3 or 4 inches of ice coming through her living room windows every winter. Everything's sticking out like this. Look at this. It's been held up.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes right across all the way. All the way across.
Yeah.
I don't know what this is, why they have wires running down there into the septic.
Dangerous. Yeah. Very dangerous.
I understand, because our pump is right here. Our septic pump is right here.
Yeah.
All our water and shit's why they got wires running down there. I don't know. That goes all the way into our cistern.
Yeah.
Like the sewage outlet. You stay up there.
Both Redmond and Redmond believe that the reason behind the poor housing conditions on Standing Buffalo is the mismanagement of funding and nepotism of the chief and council, as well as unqualified workers who are hired through their main contractor, Home Hardware. Standing Buffalo is supposed to have 211 houses, however only 200 are there. Over the past decade, 15 houses are to be built, yet only 10 were completed. In 2006, the Chief and Council decided to buy water cisterns for a set of fourplexes that were built. Consequently, because the cisterns were not built properly, they were disapproved by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, one of the entities that approves and provides funding for housing on reservations. Despite Standing Buffalo having a collective called the Housing Authority, who are in charge of sorting out conflicts and requests involving housing, as well as having housing and renovation policies, the issue of poor housing conditions continues. The Housing Authority is made up of the Chief and Council, who are already alleged to be fraudulent as it is, give or take a few other members. Some of the Housing Authority members don't have more than a grade 10 education, while the housing and renovation policies are outdated, as they were created in 1997. Along my journey through Standing Buffalo, I learned from Minnie Ryder, a friend who lives on the reserve but does not appear in this documentary, that people who have so-called connections are often given brand new homes, when the one that was previously dwelled in was fine. By giving residents homes when they don't need them, they are poorly taken care of, which raises the question, is inadequate housing the result of a lack of appreciation towards homes, as if they are being taken granted for? And what about the Canadian government? What have they done to help resolve the issue of poor housing conditions on reservations today? In 2005, there was the Kelowna Accord, a document that emphasized a neoliberal shift from social housing to private home ownership. Nonetheless, it was abolished, and since then, not too many reforms or ideas or policies in terms of reservation housing have been introduced. Looking back at history, housing was a treaty right, and still should be today. Thus, the Canadian government should be making more of an effort in cooperation with Aboriginal peoples. Even though Ryder pointed out that the housing conditions on Standing Buffalo are better than reservations such as Attawapiskat in Northern Ontario, which for 2 years has been home to 5 families that live in tent frames, as well as many others that continue to experience inadequate plumbing, mold buildup, overcrowding, and falling ceiling tiles and floors. Something has to be done. I believe that with the way the Canadian government has acted over history, they will not take the blame themselves. Clearly, colonialism is the government's workings, and Aboriginal peoples have made their mistakes in terms of the corruption of their government. Nonetheless, both nations, whose relationship with one another has been kept at a distance for more than a century, must begin to work together. The process will be long, but change is needed.